Wars begin with missiles, but they're born in secrets. What if I told you the real reason Israel attacked Iran isn't what you've been told? Beneath the smoke and headlines lies a truth few dare to speak. Stay with me, because the last piece of this story, that's where the mask finally falls. What forces a nation to stare into the abyss and strike? Beyond the thunder of jets lies a desperate calculus of survival, shadows, and a clock ticking towards midnight. The full, chilling truth behind Israel's gamble is here. To ignore its complex tapestry is to misunderstand the perilous edge we all stand upon. Threshold fear. There are lines in the sand, invisible yet utterly absolute in the minds of those who draw them. For Israel, one such line has long been defined by the specter of a nuclear-armed adversary in a hostile region. This is not mere policy, it is an ingrained national security tenet, a solemn vow echoing from the past known as the Begin Doctrine. This doctrine is not a suggestion, but a clear authorization, a heavy mantle of responsibility passed down through leadership, asserting the right, even the obligation, to act preemptively to prevent any regional power from acquiring weapons of mass destruction. It is a philosophy born of historical trauma and present-day existential anxieties, a belief that to wait for the storm to fully gather is to invite annihilation. When intelligence reports began to paint a picture of Iran's nuclear program rapidly advancing, enriching uranium to 60% purity, a breath away from weapons-grade material, and accumulating a significant stockpile measured in hundreds of kilograms, the alarm bells within Israel's security establishment reached a deafening crescendo. This wasn't just progress. It was perceived as a dash towards a point of no return. The focus of this acute anxiety settled on deeply buried facilities like Fordo and Natanz. These were not ordinary laboratories, they were fortresses of scientific endeavor, entombed beneath mountains and layers of reinforced concrete, designed to be impervious to conventional attack, silent monuments to a nation's determined pursuit. For years, these sites had represented a formidable challenge, symbols of a program that crept forward despite sanctions, sabotage, and diplomatic pressure. The intelligence suggesting preparations for advanced centrifuge deployment within these hardened sites added another layer of urgency. Each whirring centrifuge, each gram of highly enriched uranium, was seen as another grain of sand falling through the hourglass, bringing Iran, and by extension the region, closer to a nuclear threshold that Israel had sworn to prevent. The potential for a nuclear breakout was not an abstract threat. It was a tangible, approaching reality, a nightmare scenario that successive Israeli governments had pledged to avert at almost any cost. The decision to strike, therefore, was steeped in this profound, almost primal fear of crossing that Rubicon. It was a preemptive move driven by the conviction that the window for conventional action was closing, that to delay further would be to risk facing an even more perilous strategic environment. The very nature of the targets, those virtually untouchable deep underground enrichment facilities, dictated the scale and audacity of the response required. This was not about sending a minor signal. It was an attempt to physically dismantle or significantly delay key components of a program teetering on the edge of weaponization capability. The narrative from within Israel framed this as a desperate race against time, an imperative to act before the strategic balance shifted irrevocably, leaving the nation vulnerable to a threat it could neither deter effectively nor withstand if realized. This motivation, the prevention of a nuclear fait accompli, formed the core, the unshakable bedrock upon which the decision to launch a complex and risky operation was built. It's a chilling calculus where the potential devastation of inaction is weighed against the certain risks and global repercussions of aggressive preemption. The weight of such a decision is immense, resting on intelligence assessments that are rarely perfect and forecasts of future intent that are fraught with uncertainty. Yet for a nation that perceives its very existence to be on the line, the imperative to act on credible, imminent threat indicators can become overwhelming. The perceived crossing of this point of no return activated a deeply ingrained national security reflex, mobilizing immense resources and political will towards an action designed to pull the entire situation back from the brink, even if it meant stepping boldly into the realm of overt military confrontation against a formidable adversary. The deep thrum of centrifuges spinning ever faster became, in this view, the ticking clock of an impending crisis. This foundational motivation, the urgent need to halt what was seen as an imminent nuclear breakout, transcended political divides, though its execution would inevitably become intertwined with them. It was about safeguarding a future deemed intolerably dangerous, a future where the destructive power of the atom was in the hands of a regime considered implacably hostile. Every subsequent action, every tactical choice, every strategic message flowed from this primary, overriding concern: to prevent the nuclear threshold from being crossed, thereby upholding a doctrine of survival that had become almost sacred writ within the Israeli security consciousness. The aim was unambiguous: to reach into the earth and attempt to neutralize a threat burrowing its way towards an irreversible capability. Internal pressures. Beyond the existential dread of a nuclear-armed Iran, the decision to strike was also woven into a complex tapestry of domestic political dynamics and the ever-present cycle of regional retaliation. The period preceding this major operation was fraught with tension. Iran's significant missile and drone barrage in October 2023, though largely intercepted, was a stark escalation, a dramatic demonstration of Tehran's reach and willingness to engage directly. This, coupled with a history of covert Israeli actions, including the alleged targeting of Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps leaders and incidents like the bombing of consulates, had created a volatile atmosphere where the pressure for a decisive Israeli response was palpable. A nation under threat often looks to its leaders for reassurance, for a demonstration of strength and resolve, and in this context, the Netanyahu government faced considerable scrutiny. Prime Minister Netanyahu, a figure long synonymous with Israeli security, found his leadership under intense pressure, particularly following the criticisms surrounding the Gaza conflict and the intelligence failures of October 7th. The domestic political landscape was fractured, and his reputation, a cornerstone of his political longevity, had been dented. In such a climate, a bold, decisive national security operation can serve multiple purposes. Externally, it projects deterrence and resolve to adversaries. Internally, it can rally a populace, deflect criticism, and reassert a leader's credentials as a strong protector of the nation. The Rising Lion operation, with its blend of covert audacity and overt military power, was seen by many observers as an opportunity for Netanyahu to rehabilitate his image, to demonstrate that he remained firmly in command, capable of taking decisive action to safeguard Israel's security against its most formidable foes. The need to retaliate, to restore a sense of deterrence eroded by previous Iranian actions, was a powerful undercurrent. In the harsh logic of Middle Eastern power dynamics, unanswered aggression can be perceived as weakness, inviting further provocations. The psychological dimension of warfare is crucial, and Israel, heavily reliant on its qualitative military edge and reputation for decisive action, felt a compelling need to reestablish perceived dominance and control over the escalatory ladder. A major strike against Iran's most prized nuclear assets would serve not only to degrade those capabilities, but also to send an unmistakable message of Israeli reach, prowess, and willingness to incur significant risks. This message was aimed as much at Tehran as it was at the Israeli public and the wider region. Thus, the operation was not conceived in a purely strategic vacuum. isolated from the messy realities of domestic politics or the ongoing shadow war with Iran. It was, in part, a response to a confluence of pressures: the strategic imperative to counter Iran's nuclear ambitions, the tactical need to retaliate and restore deterrence, and the domestic political benefit of projecting strength and leadership during a period of vulnerability and criticism. These motivations, while distinct, became interwoven, each reinforcing the others, creating a powerful momentum towards a decisive, high-stakes military gambit. The shadow of domestic weakness and the echo of past retaliations pushed alongside the looming nuclear threat. Shadow dance, the overt military strikes, while dramatic and impactful, were reportedly preceded and supported by a more clandestine layer of operations, a shadow dance of covert intelligence work, sabotage, and technologically advanced infiltration that speaks to a sophisticated, multi-layered approach to conflict. This was not simply a case of bombers appearing in the sky. It was the culmination of a meticulously planned hybrid warfare campaign, where the lines between espionage, cyber warfare, and conventional military action blurred. The success of the Rising Lion operation was significantly enabled by this groundwork, laid by entities like the Mossad, skilled in the art of operating in the gray zones, deep within enemy territory, unseen and often unacknowledged until their effects became manifest. This intricate preparation was crucial for degrading Iran's defenses and creating vulnerabilities that the subsequent overt strikes could exploit. Reports indicate that a key element of this covert phase involved the infiltration of assets and technology. Smuggled drones, for instance, could have been used for close-in reconnaissance, for precise targeting of critical infrastructure nodes within Iran's air defense network, or even for direct sabotage. The objective was clear: to systematically weaken Iran's ability to detect, track, and engage incoming threats. This might involve disrupting radar systems, severing communication links, or neutralizing missile launcher capabilities through targeted cyber attacks or physical sabotage. The aim was to create confusion, sow discord, and effectively blind or disarm parts of the defensive shield before the primary aerial assault even began. This level of integrated covert action represents a significant evolution in operational strategy, demonstrating an ability to combine the deniability of clandestine methods with the decisive impact of conventional force. The use of artificial intelligence in conjunction with drone technology for such sabotage points to an emerging frontier in hybrid warfare. AI could potentially be used to identify optimal targets for disruption, guide autonomous systems through complex environments, or even coordinate swarms of small drones to overwhelm specific defensive components. This represents a new paradigm of operational strategy, where intelligent systems act as force multipliers, enabling smaller, covert units to achieve effects previously requiring much larger, overt deployments. The sophistication lies in the seamless integration of these cutting-edge techniques with traditional espionage and military planning, creating a potent and often unpredictable threat. The objective was not just to degrade physical assets, but also to undermine the confidence and cohesion of the defending forces. Psychological tactics also played a role in this shadow dance. The alleged warning to specific Iranian officials to flee certain areas before strikes could be interpreted in several ways. On one hand, it might be a humanitarian gesture aimed at minimizing casualties among non-combatants, or even among military personnel not directly involved in the targeted programs. On the other hand, it's a powerful psychological weapon designed to demonstrate superior intelligence capabilities, the ability to know who is where and what is about to happen. Such warnings can sow paranoia, distrust within the adversary's ranks, and potentially encourage defection or non-compliance. It subtly conveys a message of omniscience, contributing to the overall objective of degrading the enemy's will and capacity to resist effectively. This intricate blend of covert action, technological sabotage, and psychological pressure creates a disorienting environment for the adversary, making it harder to anticipate moves or mount a coherent defense. This undercurrent of hybrid warfare, the skillful blending of the unseen and the seen, was therefore a critical precursor and enabler of the main event. It reflects a deep understanding of an adversary's systems and a willingness to employ a full spectrum of tools, from human intelligence agents on the ground to advanced AI-driven sabotage platforms. This shadow dance aimed to tip the scales, to subtly reshape the battlefield before the first bomb fell, ensuring that when the overt forces arrived, they faced a compromised and disoriented opponent. The silent successes of this covert phase were integral to the louder victories that followed, showcasing a matured approach to modern conflict that leverages every available advantage. Calculated message. Operation Rising Lion, as it was reportedly codenamed by Israel, was far more than a simple military strike. It was a carefully calculated message, delivered with a potent blend of force and psychological nuance. The amalgamation of covert Mossad infiltration and overt airstrikes was not just about achieving physical objectives. It was about crafting a narrative, both for Iran and for the wider world. The sophisticated orchestration aimed to showcase an undeniable capability, a new level of operational artistry that could overwhelm even sophisticated defenses. By systematically degrading Iran's air defenses and missile launchers through prior sabotage, the subsequent airstrikes could appear even more effective, more unstoppable, creating an image of effortless penetration and precision. This psychological dimension was integral to the operation's broader strategic goals. The branding of the operation as defensive was another crucial layer of this calculated messaging. Israel consistently framed its actions as a necessary response to an existential threat, a move to protect itself from a regime it accuses of sponsoring terrorism across the region through proxies like Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis, and of openly threatening Israel's existence. This narrative is vital for garnering domestic support and, critically, for shaping international perceptions. By positioning itself as the defender acting against an aggressive, WMD-seeking adversary, Israel aimed to legitimize its actions on the world stage and to garner at least tacit understanding, if not outright support, from key allies and international bodies. This framing seeks to control the interpretation of events, casting the operation not as an act of aggression, but as a reluctant, yet necessary step towards ensuring its own survival and regional stability. Op-eds and commentary that emerged, particularly in sympathetic media, reinforced this narrative, praising Israel's step toward liberty and depicting the strikes as morally restrained actions focused on terror-sponsoring infrastructure and WMD proliferation rather than on the Iranian populace. This coordinated messaging, whether officially orchestrated or organically arising from shared perspectives, plays a significant role in the information warfare that accompanies any major military operation. It aims to build a consensus that validates the operation's goals and methods, countering alternative narratives that might cast Israel as an aggressor. The claim of targeting terror infrastructure serves to broaden the justification beyond the nuclear issue, linking Iran's atomic ambitions to its wider regional activities, thereby appealing to a broader range of international concerns. The objective was clear: to craft an image of a new paradigm in integrated operational strategy, one that was not only militarily effective, but also strategically astute in its psychological and informational dimensions. This calculated messaging sought to project an image of overwhelming capability, righteous motivation, and strategic foresight. It was about more than just destroying targets. It was about shaping perceptions, deterring future actions, and reinforcing Israel's position as a dominant regional power capable of defending its interests through sophisticated and decisive means. Every element, from the covert sabotage to the public declarations, was designed to contribute to this overarching communicative intent, making the operation a complex act of armed diplomacy as much as a military engagement. Defensive shield. A central pillar in the justification and international presentation of Israel's actions was the framing of the operation as fundamentally defensive, an essential measure to erect a shield against perceived imminent and existential threats. This narrative positions Israel not as an instigator, but as a nation reluctantly forced to act to protect its very existence from a regime it consistently accuses of aggressive intent and the active support of regional proxies dedicated to Israel's destruction. The constant refrain pointed to Iran's backing of groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, and the Houthis in Yemen, organizations that have engaged in protracted conflicts and attacks against Israeli interests and citizens. The strikes, in this context, were portrayed as a direct blow against the fountainhead of this regional instability and animosity. The accusation that Iran itself poses a genocidal threat to Israel is a potent and recurring theme in Israeli strategic discourse. This charge, invoking the deepest historical traumas, serves to underscore the perceived existential nature of the Iranian challenge, particularly if Iran were to acquire nuclear weapons. By framing the Iranian regime in such stark terms, the argument for preemptive action gains a moral urgency that transcends ordinary geopolitical rivalry. The operation against Iran's nuclear facilities, therefore, was cast as a vital act of self-preservation, aimed at preventing a hostile power with declared genocidal intentions from obtaining the ultimate means of realizing those threats. This powerful framing resonates deeply within Israel and is intended to garner sympathy and understanding from international partners who recognize the historical weight of such concerns. This defensive narrative extended to portraying the specific targets, deeply buried nuclear enrichment facilities, not merely as scientific installations, but as critical components of a broader terror-sponsoring infrastructure. By linking the nuclear program directly to Iran's support for regional militant groups, the strikes could be presented as part of a larger counter-terrorism effort. This strategic communication aimed to broaden the appeal of Israel's actions, moving beyond the niche concern of nuclear proliferation to the more widely recognized threat of international terrorism. Op-eds and public statements meticulously curated this image, lauding Israel's supposed moral restraint in focusing on such infrastructure while taking steps to avoid widespread civilian casualties, further bolstering the image of a defensive, carefully targeted operation. The messaging was clearly designed for multiple audiences. Domestically, it reassured a nervous populace that their government was taking decisive steps to protect them. Regionally, it served as a stark warning to Iran and its proxies about Israel's capabilities and resolve. Globally, it sought to build a coalition of understanding, if not outright support, by appealing to shared concerns about WMD proliferation and state-sponsored terrorism. The emphasis was consistently on Israel's right to self-defense, a universally recognized principle in international law, thereby providing a legitimizing framework for actions that might otherwise be viewed as aggressive or destabilizing. This narrative construction is a critical component of modern conflict, where the battle for perception can be as important as the battle on the ground. By consistently branding the operation as a defensive necessity, Israel aimed to occupy the moral high ground, or at least to muddy the waters enough to prevent a unified international condemnation. This carefully constructed defensive shield of rhetoric and justification was as vital to the operation's overall strategic success as the bombs themselves. It was an attempt to control the story, to define the terms of the debate, and to ensure that Israel's actions were understood not as a reckless gamble, but as a sober, if severe, response to an intolerable threat. an essential measure taken by a nation under siege to safeguard its future in a perilous neighborhood. Western Echo. The strikes against Iran's nuclear facilities did not occur in a strategic vacuum isolated to the Middle East. They resonated with, and were indeed accompanied by, actions that underscored a broader, albeit sometimes complex, Western alignment against Iran's potential nuclear breakout. The reported simultaneous U.S. military operations, codenamed Midnight Hammer, while distinct from Israel's Rising Lion, served as a powerful echo, a tangible demonstration that concerns over Iran's nuclear ambitions were not solely an Israeli preoccupation. This parallel action, even if not fully coordinated in every tactical detail, signaled a shared strategic objective: to prevent Iran from crossing the nuclear threshold. The presence of U.S. bombers and capabilities being brought to bear in the same time frame sent an unmistakable message to Tehran and the world about the seriousness with which this issue was viewed by key Western powers. This underlying alignment, however informal or operationally deconflicted rather than fully integrated, provides crucial context. While Israel may have taken the lead in the overt strike against specific Iranian nuclear sites, the knowledge that the United States, its most powerful ally, shared similar concerns and was willing to undertake its own formidable display of power undoubtedly factored into the strategic calculations. It provided a backdrop of implicit support, even if explicit joint command was not the case. For Israel, this broader Western concern, particularly American concern, serves as a force multiplier, both diplomatically and psychologically. It suggests that Israel is not standing entirely alone against a determined adversary, but is part of a wider concert of nations wary of a nuclear-armed Iran upsetting regional and global stability. The existence of a backing role for the U.S., as suggested in the analysis, points to the intricate dance of international alliances and shared security interests. This role could encompass various forms of support, from intelligence sharing that informs targeting and threat assessment, to logistical aid, to diplomatic efforts aimed at managing the fallout and shaping the international response to the strikes. It might also involve ensuring that vital supply lines for Israeli military capabilities remain open or providing a deterrent against wider escalation by other regional actors. Even if the U.S. was not directly pulling the trigger alongside Israel in Operation Rising Lion, its shadow loomed large, influencing the operational environment and the strategic repercussions. This Western echo serves multiple purposes. For Iran, it complicates its response options, as retaliation against Israel might also risk drawing in the United States more directly. For regional powers, it signals a strong Western commitment to preventing nuclear proliferation in the Middle East. For international bodies, it frames the issue not just as a bilateral Israel-Iran conflict, but as a matter of broader international peace and security. This alignment, even if expressed through parallel rather than fully joint operations, amplifies the message of deterrence and resolve, making it harder for Iran to dismiss the actions as solely the initiative of a single regional state. The Midnight Hammer operation, therefore, becomes a crucial piece of the puzzle, underscoring that the concerns were not Israel's alone, and that the capacity to act was also not confined to Israel. The interplay between Israeli actions and U.S. strategic posture creates a complex dynamic. While each nation operates under its own imperatives and decision-making processes, their shared concerns regarding Iran's nuclear program often lead to complementary, if not always fully synchronized, strategies. This perceived Western consensus, with the U.S. playing a significant, albeit perhaps less overt role in this specific instance, significantly shapes the geopolitical landscape surrounding Iran's nuclear ambitions. It reinforces the seriousness of the red lines being drawn and the potential for concerted action if those lines are crossed, sending a powerful, resonating message across the capitals of the world. Perilous path. While the immediate operational aims of the strikes, delaying Iran's nuclear program and degrading its capabilities, may have been met to some extent, the longer-term consequences remain shrouded in uncertainty, marking the beginning of a perilous path rather than a definitive conclusion. Experts offer a sobering assessment. Such strikes, however damaging, are unlikely to have dismantled Iran's nuclear program entirely. The knowledge, the expertise, the infrastructure, and potentially hidden or dispersed elements may survive, perhaps even driving the program further underground, making it harder to monitor and more resilient to future attacks. This cat-and-mouse game between proliferation and counter-proliferation is rarely settled by a single blow, however powerful. The aftermath of these actions is not a return to a stable status quo, but rather the inauguration of a long-term campaign. Israel, and indeed its allies, are likely bracing for a protracted effort involving a full spectrum of statecraft. This will undoubtedly include intensified covert actions, a shadowy war of sabotage and intelligence gathering aimed at continually disrupting any Iranian resurgence in its nuclear efforts. Diplomatic pressure will be a key component, seeking to maintain and strengthen international sanctions, to build broader coalitions to isolate Iran, and to create robust verification mechanisms if any future agreements are contemplated. Intelligence work will be paramount, a relentless endeavor to see into the opaque depths of Iran's nuclear activities, to detect any signs of reconstitution or covert progress, ensuring that the world is not caught by surprise. The critical question hanging over this perilous path is whether these actions will ultimately achieve lasting containment or, conversely, fuel further escalation and a more determined, perhaps more clandestine, Iranian pursuit of nuclear capabilities. Iran's resilience, its capacity to absorb such blows and reconstitute its efforts, will be severely tested. Its response could range from a calculated de-escalation and a return to diplomacy under duress, to a doubling down on its nuclear ambitions, seeing them as the ultimate guarantor of its security against external threats. The strategic choices made in Tehran, in response to the actions taken against it, will significantly shape the trajectory of this ongoing crisis. The cycle of strike and counter-strike, of covert action and overt posturing, could easily spiral into a wider regional conflict if not managed with extreme caution by all parties. Global diplomatic pressure, or the lack thereof, will also play a crucial role. A united international front calling for Iranian restraint and adherence to non-proliferation norms could bolster the effects of the strikes and encourage a diplomatic resolution. Conversely, a fractured international response, with major powers pursuing divergent agendas, could provide Iran with openings to mitigate the pressure and continue its program. The interplay between military action, covert operations, and the complex machinery of international diplomacy will define the success or failure of this long-term campaign. There are no easy victories, no simple solutions when dealing with deeply entrenched national ambitions and security fears on this scale. The path ahead is therefore fraught with risk and uncertainty. The strikes may have bought time, disrupted progress, and sent a powerful message, but they have also sowed seeds of potential future conflict. The enduring challenge lies in translating these tactical successes into a sustainable strategic outcome that enhances long-term security without triggering an uncontrolled escalation. This requires not only continued vigilance and a credible deterrent, but also a willingness to explore diplomatic avenues, however narrow they may appear. The human quest for security, when pursued through such high-stakes military endeavors, walks a tightrope over a chasm of unintended consequences, a truth that hangs heavy over the uncertain future of this volatile region. The complexities of such monumental decisions, balancing perceived existential threats against the terrifying prospect of open conflict, challenge our understanding of responsibility and foresight. In these moments, we witness the immense weight carried by those who must choose paths fraught with peril, where the pursuit of safety can itself lead to greater instability. The search for security is a profound human endeavor, yet its methods and consequences demand our deepest contemplation and a relentless pursuit of wisdom over simple power.